Hello, Mr. Danjuma. It's really nice to see you again. Thank you for all the work that you do in the HPV space, especially for Africa. And congratulations also on your most recent, like you just recently handed over your role as president of the World Hepatitis Alliance to Dee Lee. So congratulations for, their time as a president and also for handing over successfully to Dee Lee. So it's an honor to be speaking with you today. So just to go on, okay, I think I'll let you respond here.
Okay, no problem. Yeah, so thanks. Okay, maybe just a bit clarification. Actually, I handed over to Rachel, then Rachel handed over to Dee Lee most
Oh,
recently.
thank you.
Yeah, but yeah, it was indeed a big honor for me to serve as the president of World Hepatitis Alliance. Yeah,
Thank you. So
thank you.
we just
Yeah.
have a few, you are the main champion of the recently published paper that we published at the forum on the need for HPV clinical research in Africa. And so we just wanted to hear your thoughts about that paper. But before we go into that, Mr. Danjuma, can you just tell our listeners, our people a little bit about yourself? What is it that drew you into the Hep B research in the first place?
Mm. So thanks, Ekene, and it's indeed an honor for me to be on in this space. So my name is Danjuma, as you rightly said. And I'm an individual living with hepatitis B. I was diagnosed with hepatitis B in 2004. And I was working on a comorbidity sample in a hospital. Then I had this needle prick. And that was really what, changed my life forever. So, but I came into the hepatitis B, as first, not as a researcher, to be honest, but as a person living with the virus. So at the time of my diagnosis, there was very little information, very little support, and almost no public conversation about hepatitis B, even with my background in the health space, you know. And that really experience shaped my career, changed everything about me. And so over time, I've moved from being a patient seeking answers to becoming an advocate and eventually developing interest. Of course, at the global policy level and developing interest in research because I really needed to understand the virus that lives in my liver. I really needed to understand again what else is happening in my community and in my region. So again, considering the fact that not just Nigeria, but Africa has one of the highest burdens in the world. Yet we have very little in terms of the evidence of what is happening. Research is about evidence, it's about equity. So for me, as a person diagnosed and living with hepatitis B, research goes beyond academics. And this is where people make mistakes. They look at research purely as just academic work. Research for me as a person diagnosed with hepatitis B is about dignity, it's about equity, it's about survival. So I see this as a survival for me and for all the community and people that live with hepatitis B, because it is the evidence we generate that helps improve the science about the disease. So it's about equity, it's about dignity, about, promoting myself as a person living with hepatitis B. So what brought me into this space? First is an individual diagnosed with hepatitis B that has a quest to know more, not just for myself, but for my community. And for me, that has been the motivation.
Thank you so much for that, answer. I definitely know that there's so many people in Africa who really would appreciate the way that you advocate for this population. So now this article that we've just recently published at the Lancet Microbe, it tackles, a big issue, which is strengthening HPV
Mm.
clinical research in Africa. And so what was it that sparked the idea for
Mm.
this paper, and why did you contribute to it?
Thank you. I want to really say I really appreciate the Forum for Collaborative Research. I will tell you that during my president role, we had those engagement with Veronica and the team. And some of those, I'm happy that I really was there from the beginning of these discussions, right? And I know this the times we talked to Veronica, hey, and each time you're in all those scientific meetings, in the US, over there. There's very little in terms of what is happening in Africa. And yet, each time you're talking to partners, they tell you no evidence, nothing is happening in Africa. And yet, we have guidelines. Yet we look at the burden. I mean, look at the burden of hepatitis B or C in Africa. And then we've had this concern that even, for example, the 2015 hepatitis B guidelines, the data generated there was no African data that guided the development of that guidelines. And you're now developing guidelines that use systematic reviews that should treat a population, but the population's data was not used. So how do you now really apply those guidelines to solve the problem of the people in that region? So it wasn't just, it was really born, let me use the word frustration, but also opportunity.
Mm.
The real burden of why not this, And then the opportunity there is that we have the diversity in the hepatitis B, even the genotyping, diversity in population, diversity in geography, diversity that will really bring up rich data to advance and guide the scientific world. But these things have not been taken care of, So for me, it's really to look at, we've really been so frustrated as a patient, first of all, as a patient, that why is there not much evidence of what is happening in Africa? What is happening for the patients in my village, the patients in this remotest community in Africa? Why are their voices and data not seen in global policy or guidelines? So the frustration and yet the opportunity, the forum brought up bringing experts, I think that really gave us the impetus to push, and I'm happy that yes, that has been a successful outcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. So why do you think Africa is so underrepresented in this research?
A big question, Ekene. I think I'll look at, first of all, the funding architecture. Then, yes, there has always been this excuse of fragmented regulatory systems, which is true. The regulatory system is so fragmented across the regions, even in Nigeria, across West Africa. Almost every country have their different, regulatory systems. And unfortunately, the regional institutions that should do the right thing, harmonize these regulations, are unable to do it. So everybody's just on their own. So the funding architecture, in my opinion, the regulatory fragmentation, the perceived risks, maybe, the investors were like, they don't want to invest money and then they lose. And then there are so many myths and misconceptions also about African populations and the assumptions. A lot of times, assumptions. They don't have capacity, they don't have the people. So, and I think also lack of political prioritization by our regional leaders and then even institutions within the region. We have these regional institutions that should prioritize this and really, really pull this through. But a lot of times we have all those commitments on paper, but it doesn't really flow in terms of real action. So for me, it's not about the lack of talent. No, but probably about structural exclusion, And then funding has always gone to the global north. Pharmaceutical trial networks are built around existing infrastructure. So, and the systems are already fragmented within Africa. But importantly, hepatitis B has not received the political urgency that disease like HIV has received. So underrepresentation for me is a systemic issue and not just a scientific one. And this has been a problem within this region. In my opinion, and I think, again, because of the lack of funding, even the hepatitis community don't have a voice. People living with hepatitis don't have a voice within this region. Stigma has brought us down. No funding. We don't have empowered patients to talk. We don't have empowered community people to really amplify the need of the community. So our voices are not heard. We don't sit on the table. Patients are not even empowered to sit on the table where decisions are made. So, but I think the narrative is beginning to change a bit, and I look forward to more changes, hopefully.
Thank you for that. You said something about the lack of regulatory harmonization within the continent. Do you think that that is something that the AMA, the African Medicines Agency, do you think that's something that they could tackle?
Absolutely. The African Union, the African Center for Disease Control, I think should be the leading institution, just like the one in the Europe. I feel the African CDC, Center for Disease Control, and should take the lead in this. And I'm happy the AMI, the African Medicine Agency. I'm not sure how the ratification has gone because I said the last time there were challenges of ratification of the AMA. So, and the question you want to ask is why? Why is it not prioritized? Why our government is not prioritizing to ratify it? Again, because also maybe the patient community don't have a strong voice to shout. The hepatitis don't have so, but I feel that the African CDC should really push and ensure that these things happen. Maybe more advocacy, more push to governments to be able to ensure that ratification is done as early as possible so that, yeah, we have a stronger regulatory and harmonized regulation within the region.
Thank you so much. So now this paper, lays a lot of emphasis on multi-stakeholder collaboration as a
Uh,
way of being able to strengthen clinical research in Africa. So in your opinion, who do you think needs to be on this table and why? Who are the stakeholders you think are important?
I think one very crucial thing I want this paper to really drive home is that communities must be partners, not participants. If there's anything this paper should drive into the research and scientists and clinical people within Africa and the global north, communities must be partners and not participants. No more helicopter approach. Collaborations means designing, not consultation after decisions are made. No. Right from the prototype development, right from the concept development. And again, it shouldn't be very tokenistic. It shouldn't be picking just anybody when they come. Empowered patients, empowered communities sitting on the table to make these decisions. So I see that African researchers, number one, African researchers and academic institutions, very important, right? Ministries of health, regulatory authorities,
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies, community advocacy groups, empowered patients should be the ones at the table. I want to start seeing, or rather, we want to start seeing empowered patients as co-PIs.
Mm.
Why should research in Africa only have scientists and clinical people as PIs and authors, not community people? Empowered patients, a person with lived experience is an expert by living. So should not be looked at as a participant, as just a beneficiary. That language is also stigmatizing.
Mhm.
So want to start seeing empowered patients, people with lived experience as co-PIs in research within this region. And I think that really will help. So it's important to know that communities must be partners and not just participants.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you so much. So what do you now think should be the role of the pharmaceutical companies?
Mm.
And what role should they be playing now in this aspect of bringing in this aspect of including Africa in research? And how do you think that they are falling short of this role?
I think they're falling short when they don't invest in long-term infrastructure, not just short-term extraction. Most of this research, just 1 year, 2 years. We want to see research, we want to see long-term investments, multi-year investments that will be able to have more nuanced results, endpoints, secondary points, really well defined. And I do not want pharmaceuticals to see Africa not just as a future market,
Hmm.
but should see Africa as a present research partner.
Mhm.
Yes, the market is there for them, but it shouldn't just see the patients and Africa just as a future market. But what is it as a partner in developing evidence and much more multi-year research? And I think it's important that capacity transfer, technology transfer, you know, most often trials and capacity and systems are just helicopter. Most of the PIs are people in the global north, you know. And then even when things are published, you don't see any African leads in any research. No, we don't want that to happen anymore. And we want to see more people who live the experience as OPIs. So, and again, we want to see transfer of technology. We want to see more domestication of science, of technology within this region. So long-term infrastructure investment, yeah, and then seeing us more as partners and not just market. So patients should not, or communities or Africa should not just be seen as a guinea pig where, you know, just for profiteering. No.
So, in situations where communities are not fully involved in clinical research, what do you think, from your own experience, what do you think is the outcome of that?
Okay, you can see this dress I'm wearing, right?
Yes.
The person that made this dress measured me, my size, my width, my everything, and developed a dress that fits me.
Mhm.
So research becomes misaligned without local realities. I'll look at, for example, there are diverse genotypes of hepatitis B within Africa. The global books talks about hepatitis B 15, 20, 30 years before cirrhosis and ACC, liver cancer developed. But in Africa, we're seeing younger people less than 25 developing ACC.
Mm.
Why? Because there's not much studies to even see why is this in Africa?
Yeah.
What is it that is making this happen in Africa? So if research doesn't include or involve Africa, so it becomes misaligned with local realities. How are drugs developed to address local context? Recruitment suffers, there's no trust. I was speaking with some pharmacists today. I told them that as patient as a community, when there's no even transparency in recruitment and information, there's no trust.
Mhm.
And then how would these findings translate into policy? And then equity matter. I mean, ethically, it reinforces inequality.
Mm.
If there's no research, if we're not included in the design,
Yeah.
then if there's inequality, ethics are violated. And then so when everybody's on the table, it improves the science. And I think again, it's not only the science, it's methodological.
Right.
When you have inclusiveness in designing and diversity, it's methodological. It's also scientific to also to bring this diversity in every research. So it improves the science of whatever you do. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you so
Mm.
much. So another point that you raised was about political will among
Mm.
regional leaders. So in practical terms, how would you describe that? What would political will look like? For instance, in Nigeria,
Mm.
what would that really look like in practical terms?
Political will is not just the paper commitments. Political will should translate into domestic budget allocation for hepatitis B. And not just the budget, but release of funds.
Yeah.
Because they're often than not, they prioritize, they say they budgeted, but they don't release funds. So two, integration of hepatitis B into national health priorities, either at the birth dose vaccination level or at the treatment level, the diagnostic level. And then it should be part of, for example, regulatory or even medicines, policies or protocols. I'll give an example. In some African countries, hepatitis B TDF is not even on the essential medicine list. So, but if this is integrated into systems, it only makes it shows the political will. And of course, investment in research infrastructure. Infrastructure means the systems, infrastructure means the human resource, infrastructure means the cooling chain, the hospital, the laboratory, the fridges, and everything. Everything that makes. Ekene, do you know how many times I was in ASLD in Boston and we're having this site meeting? And then I kept talking about research in Africa. And the person was like, in your facility or in where you are, do you have just this simple question? A refrigerator that could freeze samples below 40 degrees. I was like, oh my God, why do we get that? You get. So yeah, our government, our political leaders will tell you they have roads, but they don't prioritize health as development. They don't prioritize health as needed investment. So political budget allocation, budget release, integration into national health priorities, and then streamlined regulatory approval processes. That's another thing many farmers complain about. Multiple regulatory processes. In one country, you have maybe 5 or 6 different regulatory agencies.
Wow.
That are looking at maybe a particular molecule, a particular drug. By the time the pharma company comes and passes through these 5 different regulatory agencies, the prices have jacked up more than 10 times, and the patient receives the brunt of it. Look at TDF. How much is TDF? They'll tell you that the base price is $1 or $2. In Nigeria, it's more than $10. And they'll complain to you, they have so much bottlenecks to experience. So streamline regulatory approval processes, for God's sake, for the sake of the patient. And that really helps a lot. And that is a part of political commitment. But do you know the problem, Ekene? Governments want to generate revenue, so they put so many taxes at the expense of the result that will show in the lives of the patient and the commodities. So all these multiple barriers contribute into making the whole system so chaotic for the patient. So leaders should publicly acknowledge hepatitis B as a national issue, not as a silent epidemic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. In this paper, one big issue that was raised a lot was funding. And you even started your talk with funding as well. So, what are your thoughts? Why do you think that hepatitis B research has struggled a lot with attracting the same level of funding, like, for instance, HIV? Like, what really is the problem here?
The visibility. We keep hearing awareness. We keep hearing lack of prioritization. I've asked this question again. Why would a disease that kills 1.3 million people annually not be prioritized? I'm not saying other diseases are less important, but why would the disease so? I think over time, we keep talking about lack of data, lack of evidence, lack of awareness. So again, awareness. Even when you meet with people who you think are learned, educated, you ask them hepatitis, they tell you they don't know what that disease is. But ask them about HIV and TB, they can tell you everything about HIV. And again, because a lot of investment has gone into HIV research, into TB research. For example, you now, through research, know U is equals to U in HIV. But can you tell me about that in hepatitis? Not much has been done. So we have struggled because we have lacked the visibility, data. We have lacked connecting hepatitis B into, let's say, maternal and child health, into liver cancer, into sexual reproductive health. So, but with more knowledge and science, we've been able to connect more. When HIV came, you see the person with the skeleton lying in the bed, and people are moved. Oh no, AIDS kills.
Yeah.
But what about hepatitis? People are dying of liver cancer. Go to the hospital death registry, you don't see death attributable to hepatitis B. They don't reflect that. But again, funny enough, go to even cancer movements. I bet you, we just had the cancer month, you barely can hear liver cancer as an issue. But you have all the other cancers. I'm not saying they're not important. So the lack of visibility, even in spaces where we should be. Liver cancer is one of the most highest driver of mortality in Africa among younger generation. But we don't, where are we? Again, because how many liver cancer survivors do we have in Africa? You barely can count 2 or 3. Survival rate is very poor. So the lack of visibility of hepatitis, either in terms of awareness or even data that connects it to either some high mortality, some maybe as part of indicator of economy, I think has really impacted on us negatively. While HIV has benefited massive global mobilization, massive activism, and political visibility, hepatitis B has remained largely silent, despite causing comparable mortality globally. The stigma, the lack of awareness, the weak advocacy movements have contributed to chronic underfunding. I can tell you that I started my local charity in 2010. Many people in hepatitis advocacy have stopped because there's no funding to continue the work. Where is the funding? So a whole lot of things, the lack of visibility, lack of awareness, activism, have all contributed to the underfunding of hepatitis, unlike HIV and other diseases.
Yeah. So do you have any suggestions for possible funding models or
Mm.
funding partnerships that you think would be helpful for advancing HBV research?
Again, I'm probably going to say something that maybe you may not like. I think we in this space have given governments a very simplistic approach to hepatitis. This terminology of lowest hanging fruit,
Mm-hmm.
we have used it to a fault, which, in my opinion, has given many governments the easy road to elimination. Yes, we need to close the tap to new infection, right?
Yeah.
Stopping new infection for hepatitis B by preventing mother-to-child transmission of hepatitis B. But what happens to the undiagnosed 200 million plus that have not been diagnosed who need treatment? What happens to them? What happens to the parents of those children or guardians or relatives or caregivers? So increase funding and then blended financing models, not just the easy ways. We really need to go the hard and the fast and the furious way, diagnose more. I'll give you one example again with my country, Nigeria. If Nigeria is to reach the target of eliminating hepatitis by 2030, over 255,000 people need to be diagnosed every year for hepatitis C, and over 2 million for hepatitis B, and over 1,000 treatments. I don't see that happening because at the moment it's less than 2. Globally, where are we in diagnosis? Less than what? Less than what? And this 2026. So I think we need blended financing models where government, philanthropy, industry could co-invest. I think that could be one way out. We have rich people, example from my region of Africa, who could invest money. I don't want to call names. We have rich billionaires in Africa who could just pick a token. I'm so impressed with the Global North. The billionaires in Global North are putting back their money into philanthropy. What happens to African rich billionaires? So blended financing models. Number 2, regional research consortia. We need to also create economies of scale, build consortia, and then maybe advance market commitments for hepatitis B and incentivize innovation, maybe. So I'm saying I don't have the solution, but I think if we come up with creative, innovative ways, we might be able to move it. But testing, more diagnosis, more treatment, domestication of maybe local manufacture of some of these point of care diagnostics. We need more point of care. We need more of these commodities within Africa. And again, I'm afraid Ekene, that the TDF, I don't know, most of African CDF is not even produced locally manufactured in Africa. I don't know how we can sustain that within this region.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much. So now, based on all the points that you have made and that you have raised, what do you think that success would look like in the
Ah,
HPV clinical research in Africa 5 or 10 years from now?
I wish I could see within the next 5 years multiple active hepatitis B clinical trial sites across Africa. I want to see African-led principal investigators. That also includes the community. I wish the people from Africa CDC and AMA would listen to this so that we have a harmonized regulatory harmonization across our regions. We don't want to see something different from West Africa, another one from East Africa, Southern Africa, all having different harmonizations. We don't want to see countries putting multiple regulatory systems. Please, countries should harmonize regulatory taxations. So regulatory harmonization across regions and within countries, local manufacturing partnership. Nigeria had come up with a swap and a local manufacturer. I don't know how that is translating to action. Countries should not just make pronouncements, but should give tax incentives to those companies. And that may be a way to motivate the manufacturers, tax holidays, tax incentives. Because when you put multiple taxes, it now translates back to the poor man, the patients, right? some local manufacturing partnerships and incentives, maybe. And then, most importantly, African patients must be enrolled in cure trials from the earliest phases, from the beginning. So I think if we do that, I hope within the next 5 years, if we see that, that might change the needle a bit.
Thank you so much. So this article did, raise a lot of challenges and suggestions, and you have really highlighted some of these challenges and expanded more on some of them as well. So in spite of all of these challenges and in spite of the fact that it looks like it's a long road to travel, what gives you hope? And, what keeps you motivated pushing this work forward?
A difficult thing to say, Ekene. I become emotional sometimes when I say this because I see many young people dying in Africa needlessly, people with hope, people with ambition, people with career plans dying of liver cancer because they were not diagnosed early, because they were not treated early. So, but what gives me hope is that I've seen the transformation possible when advocacy, science, and policy align, when there's commitment beyond papers, when there's more testing and treatment. I think the success we have seen in HIV, so I've seen countries that have shifted the narrative on HIV. I believe hepatitis can follow the same path. I hope so. And I lost my mom to hepatitis, to liver cancer. And so each time I see people with liver cancer, I just hope that they're diagnosed early, and then so that we don't lose so many people. So I remain motivated because behind every statistics, behind every data is a person, like I was before. And many of these people are waiting for answers. They're waiting for answers. And I hope that some of all these papers we publish should not just sit on the shelf, should not just remain in people's heads, but should translate into action. And as a person living with hepatitis B, yes, sometimes I fear for my life for not having cancer, but I'm lucky to have been diagnosed. But again, there are thousands and millions who are waiting for answers, who are waiting to be diagnosed. So my hope and prayer is that all of this should translate into action, into saving more lives, and research to translate into also evidence that would translate into action. Not just research for the research's sake, ticking the box that research has been done, but it should translate into saving lives. So for me, it's really been a privilege working with the forum. So I hope that Africa must move from participation to leadership, and then inclusion improves the science, as I said earlier. And then equity should not be seen as charity. It should be seen as right. So, and patients should not be seen as mere guinea pigs, but as co-partners, not participants. If we're treated with the rights as people with lived experience as experts, I believe we hope to begin to move the needle. And that might be able to make the changes that we want to see. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you so much, Danjuma. I mean, this interview has been mind-blowing, to say the least. Like, I have
Thank you.
learned even so much more just by listening to you. It's almost like you have the entire paper in your head. So, and then you also added more to that paper as well. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
sharing with us your passion, your interest, your motivation, to make sure that there is clinical research in Africa. And we look forward as the forum to continue to work with you and to support
Thank you.
your interest in this space. So thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your
I
time.
appreciate it, Kenny. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.